Have you ever laughed so hard at a television show that you assumed it would last forever? A show that felt untouchable, timeless, immune to criticism. Now imagine waking up one day to discover that the same show, once adored by millions, is suddenly being condemned, questioned, and quietly pushed toward the exit. Not because it failed to entertain, but because the world around it changed. That's exactly what happened to the Benny Hill Show. For decades, Benny Hill was one of the most recognizable faces in television history. His comedy crossed borders, cultures, and languages. You didn't need subtitles to understand it. A raised eyebrow, a frantic chase, or a perfectly timed pause was enough to make people laugh anywhere on Earth. But one sketch, just a few minutes of screen time, changed how people saw him forever. What once sparked laughter now sparked outrage. What once made him a hero now made him a target. And that single moment would come to symbolize the end of an era. This is the full story of Benny Hill's rise, his worldwide dominance, and the cultural shift that ultimately left him behind. Before the fame, before the chase scenes, before the theme music that became synonymous with chaos, there was Alfred Hawthorne Hill. He was born in Southampton in the mid-1920s, though even historians still debate the exact year. Some records say 1924. Others insist on 1925. That small uncertainty feels fitting for a man whose public persona would later overshadow his private life almost entirely. His upbringing was ordinary. His father ran a business selling surgical instruments, a practical, no-nonsense profession that had nothing to do with comedy or performance. On the surface, there was no obvious path leading Alfred toward show business. But buried in his family history was something far more influential. His grandfather had once been a circus clown. That detail alone didn't guarantee a future in comedy, but it planted a seed. Even if no one spoke about it openly, the idea of performance, of entertaining strangers, of transforming awkwardness into laughter, quietly lingered in Alfred's imagination. Before comedy entered his life, he worked a long list of everyday jobs. He delivered milk. He drove vehicles. He stacked shelves at Woolworths. He even played drums. None of it was glamorous. None of it was funny. But those jobs taught him something that would later define his humor: how people behave when they think no one is watching. He noticed the small habits, the awkward pauses, the silent frustrations, and the exaggerated reactions people made in ordinary situations. He didn't laugh at them cruelly. He studied them, stored them away. And years later, those observations would become characters, gags, and moments that audiences recognized instantly because they had seen themselves doing the same things. Then came the Second World War. Like millions of others, Alfred's life was interrupted. He joined the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, where he learned to repair engines and vehicles. Later, he served as a driver and searchlight operator, guiding beams across the night sky to expose enemy aircraft. War is not a place where comedy feels natural, but it was there, unexpectedly, that Alfred Hill discovered what comedy could truly do. When he was transferred to the Combined Services Entertainment Division, he found himself performing for exhausted soldiers, men who had seen too much, lost too much, and needed laughter as desperately as they needed sleep. Standing on makeshift stages, telling jokes, and performing sketches, he realized something profound. Comedy wasn't just entertainment. It was relief. It was survival. It was a brief escape from fear. That understanding would shape his entire career. After the war, Alfred looked to the great British music hall tradition. These performers didn't rely on complex dialogue or intellectual humor. They used slapstick, parody, exaggerated expressions, and impeccable timing. But one performer stood above all others in his mind: American radio legend Jack Benny. Alfred admired how Jack Benny used silence as a weapon, how a pause could be just as funny as a punchline, how understatement could amplify humor instead of weakening it. In tribute, Alfred changed his name. From that moment on, he would be known as Benny Hill. His first major break came in 1947 with a radio show called Variety Bandbox. Audiences quickly noticed his sharp timing and his ability to play multiple characters. But radio had limitations. Benny's strength wasn't just what he said, it was how he moved, how he looked, and how his face reacted. Television was the missing piece. By 1950, he transitioned to TV, where his physical comedy could finally breathe. Facial expressions, exaggerated walks, sudden shifts in posture, these were things radio could never capture. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Benny Hill demonstrated remarkable range. In 1962, he starred in an anthology series where he played a different character in each episode. Then, in a move that shocked many, he took on the role of Nick Bottom in a televised version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. It proved something important. Benny Hill wasn't just a clown. He was an actor. He returned to radio with Benny Hill Time, parodying pop culture, mimicking spy films, and introducing characters that would become recurring favorites. With every project, his reputation grew, not just as a comedian, but as a craftsman of timing and performance. By the early 1960s, Benny Hill was no longer a boy from Southampton. He was a rising star, and his biggest chapter was about to begin. The Benny Hill Show first aired on January 15, 1955. From the start, it felt different. While most comedy programs relied on stand-up routines or verbal jokes, Benny brought together music hall traditions and television's fast-paced energy. Each episode felt like controlled chaos, short sketches, songs, visual gags, and absurd characters flowing one after another. It didn't follow strict rules. It invented its own. When the show moved to Thames Television in 1969, everything expanded. Episodes became longer. Sketches became more ambitious. Musical numbers grew larger. The production felt bigger, louder, and more confident. And the world responded. By the 1970s, The Benny Hill Show was airing in over 140 countries. Language barriers didn't matter. Visual comedy traveled faster than words. A chase scene didn't need translation. A pratfall was universal. Audiences everywhere recognized the same characters. Fred Scuttle, with his garbled speech and clueless confidence. Harry Hill, the embodiment of the struggling everyman. Jackie Wright, whose silent reactions made him the perfect comedic foil. And then there was the ending. Every episode closed with a frantic chase set to the unmistakable sound of yakety sax. The sped-up footage, the overlapping characters, the absurd escalation, it became iconic. So iconic that the music itself eventually became shorthand for chaos and silliness long after the show ended. At its peak in Britain, over 21 million people tuned in weekly. In the United States, the show earned Emmy nominations. In Europe, Benny Hill won the Rose d'Or, one of television's highest honors. He was no longer just a British comedian. He was a global phenomenon. But beneath the laughter, something else was brewing. In the 1980s, Benny Hill introduced something new. Hill's Angels, a group of dancers whose choreographed routines added spectacle to the show. Some viewers loved it. Others didn't. Critics began to argue that the show leaned too heavily on sexualized imagery. What had once been dismissed as cheeky fun started to draw sharper scrutiny. At first, the criticism didn't seem dangerous. After all, the show was still successful. But society was changing. Audiences were becoming more aware of representation, gender roles, and cultural responsibility. Comedy was evolving. Political satire and socially aware humor were gaining ground. And then came the sketch. The sketch was structured as a parody of a beauty pageant. On paper, it sounded familiar, almost harmless. But execution matters. As contestants walked across the stage, Benny's character exaggerated their movements, reduced them to visual punchlines, and stripped them of individuality. They weren't characters. They weren't participants in the joke. They were the joke. What followed didn't feel playful to many viewers. It felt uncomfortable, crude, unnecessary. For years, critics had accused the show of objectifying women. Suddenly, they had evidence, a single scene that crystallized every complaint they had ever made. The reaction was immediate. Newspapers questioned whether the show belonged on primetime television anymore. Broadcasters faced public pressure. Feminist voices argued that the sketch reflected deeper issues within popular culture. Younger audiences weren't amused. They were embarrassed. The sketch didn't just fail, it symbolized everything that felt outdated about the show. At the same time, a new wave of comedians was reshaping British humor. Known as alternative comedians, they rejected slapstick and leaned into political commentary and social criticism. One of the most vocal was Ben Elton. He openly criticized Benny Hill, arguing that the show's humor encouraged harmful attitudes toward women. His comments hit the public like a lightning bolt. Supporters rallied behind him. Others rushed to defend Hill, calling the accusations unfair and exaggerated. But culture doesn't wait for debates to settle. Regulators began re-evaluating standards. Broadcasters became cautious. What once passed as silly fun was now seen through a moral lens. Benny Hill found himself in an impossible position, praised abroad, criticized at home. His greatest strength had become his greatest weakness. By the late 1980s, the numbers told the story. Ratings were dropping in Britain. Younger viewers had moved on. Production costs soared. Each episode cost hundreds of thousands to produce, a massive investment for a show losing domestic support. In 1989, after more than 2 decades, the decision was made. The Benny Hill show was canceled. Fans were stunned. Benny himself tried to adapt, launching a world tour and filming a special intended to revive his career. But it never truly took off. The industry had moved on. Off-screen, Benny Hill lived quietly. Despite his wealth, he rented modest apartments, shopped carefully, and avoided luxury. He never married. He kept his personal life private. His health declined in the early 1990s. After a heart attack and kidney failure, he refused surgery. On April 20th, 1992, Benny Hill died quietly in his armchair at the age of 68. A new opportunity arrived that same day, too late for him to see. Today, Benny Hill remains a complicated figure. To some, he is a slapstick genius whose comedy transcended language. To others, he represents a time when humor didn't yet understand its impact. His story isn't just about one man. It's about how comedy evolves, how cultures change, and how even the biggest stars can be left behind when the world decides to laugh at something new. That's the story of Benny Hill's rise and his fall.